I'm Brandon Hodnett, Director of Athletics Communications at Swarthmore College. We're beginning a new series of interviews featuring our alumni called Then and Now. Joining me by phone, our first featured alumnus ran cross country and played tennis, basketball, and baseball during his time at Swarthmore. Went on to serve in the U.S. Army, attended Harvard Law School, led the state of Massachusetts as governor for 3 terms, and was a Democratic candidate for the office of the President of the United States. From the class of 1955, Michael Dukakis.
So, Mr. Dukakis, first of all, I just want to ask you how you and your family are doing in this crazy time.
As well as can be expected. You know, I teach at Northeastern University, have for 20 years, but due to winter in Los Angeles at UCLA, Northeastern is a 3/4 of the year school, so we take the winter quarter and go out there, which has been great fun. I mean, we've been doing the UCLA bit during the winter for 20 years. Unfortunately, this year, and I don't know whether it's part of the environmental problem out there, although, you know, the quality of the air in Los Angeles is 50 times better than it used to be. But I always get a cough, and apparently it has something to do with particulates in the atmosphere. And it'll last for about a month. This year, unfortunately, it went more than a month and turned into pneumonia. So I was hospitalized for pneumonia, recovered, was doing fine, and then had I don't know whether it was a relapse or whatever, but got sick again, had to go back into the hospital, had surgery, and so and I'm one of these guys that never gets sick, so this has not been the greatest year. In any event, we're back in Boston, and I'm healthy, and back in the groove, but that's our one problem. And Kitty and I are in our 80s, so we're not kids anymore, and so this has been a little unsettling. But we seem to be doing fine and getting stronger, and so we're doing okay. But I think my teaching days are over. You know, I've taught at Northeastern for 20 years with this UCLA thing in the wintertime, and the docs here tell me that this pandemic is going to last for at least, I don't know what they're telling you down there, but here at least it's going to last at least through the next full academic year, which means that I can't be in a classroom for the next academic year. By that time, I'm going to be 88 years of age. So I finally decided I've got to officially retire from teaching, which is a little unsettling, but if it's got to be done, it's got to be done.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, you know, we're blessed with 3 great kids and a flock of grandkids, and I'm still very active politically and otherwise around here. So we're not tossing in the sponge, but it's going to be different, and we're beginning to try to kind of get used to it and adjust to it. But still active and still very concerned about what's going on, obviously politically and otherwise.
Yeah. Well, it's great to hear that you've recovered, that you're doing better. I'm sorry to hear about the end of your teaching career, though.
Well, it's been great fun, and I've enjoyed it immensely, and love working with young people, but still feel fine, feel good, but just recognizing that age is setting in a little bit.
Yeah.
So there it is.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to take a little bit of a trip down memory lane with you.
Yeah.
And wanted to see if we could go all the way back. How did you end up deciding to go to Swarthmore?
It's a very interesting story. I'd never heard of the place. I was a pretty good athlete in high school and wanted to continue to be active in competitive sports if I could. I mean, I was no star, but I was okay. And my brother was at Bates, and I was kind of headed there. But he said, you know, it's a little remote up here, and you like cities and stuff. Why don't you take a look at Swarthmore? I've literally never heard of the place. So I did, and ended up going to Swarthmore. I'd never been out of New England. Those days, you know, you jump on planes and go places. So the first time I was out of New England was when I went down on a high school senior trip to the main line to, what is it? I never could quite figure it out. Was it Wayne High School or whatever? But anyway, in Wayne, PA, and spent a week there, and then visited Swarthmore, and decided to go, and ended up 1951 at Swarthmore. And it was a very important decision that I made because it was not only different, but that was the McCarthy era where places like Swarthmore were really up to their eyeballs in this anti-communist, this communist hysteria thing. And in fact, I'm now just reading a fairly new biography on Joe McCarthy, which, believe me, is not only interesting but recalls a lot of interesting history, and got pretty actively involved in politics, both at Swarthmore and in the Philadelphia area, as well as back here. Because when I come back during summertime, I got pretty actively involved politically here in my hometown. And not to go on at great length, but just to give you some sense of what was going on at the time, I was at Swarthmore for 4 years. Was graduated in '55, and 6 weeks later, I was being drafted in the Army, and ended up doing my basic training at Fort Dix in New Jersey. And about 3 days after we got there, all of us were passed for an interview. It was about 5 minutes, and somebody talked to you and decided what you were going to do for the rest of your 2 years in the military. Except in my case, I had an interview, which with another draftee who was a personnel guy, and who it turned out was the son of a rather prominent right-wing politician from the western part of the country. He proceeded to interview me with a file that included, Brandon, every single political activity I'd ever engaged in at Swarthmore College.
My word.
All in this file. And I'm this Greek kid from Boston. And it took us about 10 years to find out where they got that information. It turned out that the FBI had a tap on the Swarthmore switchboard, and apparently was listening into conversations of guys like me and others who were active politically. And fortunately, in some cases, folks who were interviewed and had been active in organizations that the government didn't like would be other than honorably discharged. Fortunately, they didn't do that to me, and I ended up spending 16 months in Korea from 1955 to '57. But imagine, a tap on the Swarthmore switchboard and paying people to listen to conversations of guys like me is really, really unbelievable. But that was the McCarthy era, and we were all part of it. The school itself obviously was not a fan of Joe McCarthy, but that's what was going on at the time. And Swarthmore obviously was deeply into it. So I served my 2 years in the military, came back, went to law school, and then began getting very actively involved politically up here.
You were an athlete at Swarthmore. You ran cross country. I saw pictures of you playing basketball and baseball as well. Am I missing anything? Does that sound right?
I played baseball my first year and decided I was probably a better tennis player than, I think there were a couple of catchers who were ahead of me. So I moved to tennis, and I was, not a great tennis player, but I was, I think, 7th or 8th maybe ranked in the team, and played tennis for my last 3 years. Played a couple of years of basketball and ran cross country all 4 years.
Okay.
Except, when was I in Washington? I was in Washington the fall of my senior year, in the so-called Washington semester program at American University. So didn't run cross country that year. But I was pretty active politically. I'd run the Boston Marathon up here, and always been a runner. So sports was something that I did, enjoyed, and Swarthmore was a great place to do it.
When did you run the marathon, and did running stick with you for a long time, and even into your political career?
I ran it as a senior in high school here in Brookline, Massachusetts, and then ran cross country for 4 years at Swarthmore.
Yeah.
Or 3 years, I guess, for that last fall.
And did you stay fairly active in running for after college?
Well, it turned out that it was the best way to get exercise,
Yeah.
especially if you're in politics. So yeah, I continue to run, not competitively in any way, but just for exercise. These days I'm walking, not running, but always have tried to stay pretty active. And during my political career, I mean, the easiest and the best way to get exercise was to go out at 9 or 10 at night and run. So I kept running for many years until I finally got into my 40s and started getting a pain here and an ache there, and decided that maybe age was taking over. But I've always tried to stay active, and these days it's walking that does that for me.
Are there any interesting stories or big personalities of classmates or teammates from your time on the cross country team or tennis team that really stick out to you?
Well, I had a couple of roommates named Frank Sievers and Chuck Cooper, and both of them were good athletes. Sievers was a wrestler, and Cooper was one of the best all-around athletes I've ever known. A very interesting guy who actually, if you can believe this, was drafted by the Los Angeles Rams as an end. He must have made half the tackles on the football team, and decided to pass up the Los Angeles Rams and get a PhD in economics at MIT. And we were really quite close. Frank was a wrestler and ended up as the top State Department guy when it came to refugees and refugee assistance. And so we always stayed in pretty close touch. We had some good athletes at Swarthmore. We were pretty close, all of us, and it was an important part of my college career, no question about it.
I don't know much about your head coach, Jim Miller. Do you have any memories of him? Anything in particular?
Cross country?
Yeah.
Yeah, just a very good, decent guy, and fun to run for and work with and so on. And Ed Faulkner, the tennis coach, was a wonderful guy. I don't know if you've run into him, but he was well known in the Philadelphia area, and he was a tennis coach and a very good guy. And one interesting story, I was kind of trying to figure out, what do you want to do? You want to stick with baseball? I finally decided in my second year that I'd go out to the tennis team. Now, he had tried to get me to play tennis my first year because I was the captain of my tennis team in high school. I said, no, I want to try baseball. Decided maybe that wasn't the place for me, and so went over to see him to tell him that I really thought I ought to get serious about tennis, and he was a wonderful guy. He said, well, what'll it be next year, Dukakis, lacrosse? Anyway, but a great guy and an interesting guy and a good coach. So my last 3 years were tennis. Played basketball, JV basketball for a couple of years, and then ran cross country in the fall.
What was it like balancing your coursework, your involvement with political associations on campus and athletics? What was that like, trying to juggle all that?
Well, I'm a reasonably well-organized guy, but I don't know that there was any, never seemed to be a problem. I mean, I was pretty active politically, active athletically, and a pretty good student. So I just, liked them all, did them all, and they were an important part of my 4 years there, no question about it.
The 1954 yearbook said that you ran as if you were being chased by a Republican. Do you remember that quote?
I don't remember the quote.
Yeah,
that's a pretty good one.
Would you say that characterized the way you ran?
I don't know. I don't think I ran figuring there was a Republican behind me, but or in front of me for that matter. But it's kind of a fun quote.
Yeah. So were you pretty well known for your political aspirations even back then?
Yes. Yeah. No question.
Yeah. In what ways did going to Swarthmore shape who you are?
I think in many, many ways. Certainly, in terms of my intellectual development, was very important. The honors program, which I really enjoyed enormously in my last 2 years, was very important. many of whom were interested politically. As I suggest, for example, these two roommates of mine, Cooper and Sieverts, both ended up in public service in important roles. Sieverts in the State Department, and Cooper in a variety of capacities. He was one of our top people in our embassy in Vietnam. He was on the staff of the National Security Council. He was deeply and actively involved, and those were the folks that we got to know, liked, worked with, and unfortunately, one of the things about this current situation is that, as you know, we had to cancel our reunion, which a lot of us were looking forward to, our 65th of all things. And I don't exaggerate how important that experience was for me. Really, it had a lot to do with my ending up actively involved politically and doing what I've done.
When you came to Swarthmore, you originally weren't studying political science. I think maybe.
No, I was a tentative pre-med.
Okay.
And had taken chemistry and biology in high school, so I figured I'd start with physics at Swarthmore. And I just couldn't get it, Brandon. I mean, never had this experience in my life. It didn't make any difference how hard I worked. I just didn't get physics. So I got a charitable D in the course. I was having a wonderful time in political science and economics and history. And I suppose that's what a good liberal arts school does for you. I mean, it tells you what you like and what you may be good at and what you're not so good at. And while I've always been very interested in healthcare and health policy, I think I was the second governor in the country to get a universal healthcare bill passed by my state legislature. It wasn't going to be as a doctor, and still, deeply interested and actively involved in healthcare reform, but not as a practitioner. Not as a practitioner. And no question that first year at Swarthmore with physics had a profound influence on what I ended up doing.
So there was a couple other things that I noticed from old issues of the Halcyon. And I feel like there might be some good stories here. So the 1955 yearbook called you a hitchhiker par excellence. Is there a good story there about hitchhiking?
I hitchhiking all over the country. I think I covered about 40,000 miles.
Oh my word! Where were you going?
With a buddy, often another Swarthmore student, but we spent a lot of time traveling around the country and doing it for nothing, hitchhiking. So that was an important part of my college experience. And as I say, usually with another Swarthmore buddy, some of whom I'm still in touch with from time to time. Dick Burtis and I don't know what that name means anything to you, but he was in my class, became a doctor, and has practiced in Vermont for years. He was one of my hitchhiking buddies. Jerry Schiller, another classmate of mine, who ended up chairing the philosophy department at Washington University in St. Louis, was another one. We did a lot of hitchhiking together. It was a good way to travel, and it didn't cost you anything. So it was an interesting way to enjoy the United States of America and to do so for very little. So I was a hitchhiker, no question about it. Kids do that these days? I don't think so.
No. And I think it said something about Mexico City. Did you hitchhike all the way to there as well?
Schiller and I went all the way to Mexico City and Acapulco.
Oh, my word.
Yeah.
And then I also saw a photo of you cutting hair, and I think it may have been in the recent SWAT talk that you did, that you said you would cut hair for black students because they were often denied service in town. What was your experience like as a barber?
I arrived on campus, and the barbershops in the village would not cut the hair of black kids. Now, we didn't have a huge number of black kids in school. I mean, maybe a dozen. But a bunch of us were pretty outraged over that whole thing and decided we'd boycott the barbershops. barbershops, and I became the campus barber and cut a lot of hair on the third floor of Wharton Hall, I can tell you.
Wow.
And I think that picture in the yearbook is of me cutting Jack Finkelstein's hair, another very good guy who did become a doctor, out in front of Wharton. That was yours truly, cutting hair. I mean, you know, you think about it now, Brandon. I mean, African Americans being basically told that they couldn't get their haircut in the borough of Swarthmore. They'd have to go to Chester if they wanted a haircut. I mean, just you know, I mean, the indignity of it, the whole thing is, and you know, we're obviously still going through this stuff. Though believe me, it's a hell of a lot better than it was back then. I mean, but anyway, a bunch of us decided we were going to boycott the barbershops, and I became the campus barber without the license. Don't tell the barber board. I cut illegally. You know, it was the beginning of some civil rights activism that was beginning to take place.
So after your time at Swarthmore, you were in the military, you went to Harvard Law School, and then you began your career in politics. What memories do you have from your first time running for political office and being elected to office?
Well, I'd been quite actively involved in local politics here in my town. Fortunately, we have a really interesting political system in New England, which involves, among other things, representative town meetings. I mean, Brookline had 60,000 people, so you couldn't have an open town meeting. And I think in 1912 or 15 or something like that, the state legislature gave large towns the right to elect a representative town meeting. And my town has had that ever since. 240 members who run for office and serve as a town legislature. You don't get paid. You maybe meet 6 times a year, but you're kind of a political leader and a community leader and that kind of thing. So when I got back from Korea, I decided to run for town meeting from my precinct. There were 12 precincts at the time, and rang every doorbell in the precinct, in front of the polling place for 13 hours, and got elected and became a town meeting member. That was the first political office I ever held, and then a few years later ran for the legislature and got elected to the legislature, and then was kind of on my way.
And then after becoming governor of Massachusetts, what were the biggest challenges that you faced leading the state?
Massachusetts had a number of problems. For one thing, it was very corrupt. It was one of the 3 or 4 most corrupt states in the country. And so one of the big issues when I first got into the legislature in the early 60s was just cleaning the place up and setting high standards of integrity and those kinds of things. And secondly, it was an older industrial state, which by the mid-70s was in deep trouble economically. Our traditional industries of textiles and shoes and those kinds of things were failing badly. So when I became governor, my single most important job was to see if I could, with the help of a lot of people, get the economy moving in this state and revive it. And it was a big task. Fortunately, we were pretty successful over a period of time. I was defeated actually for re-election the first time. Came back, beat the guy that beat me, and then was governor for 2 more terms after that. By the time I left office, Massachusetts was doing a hell of a lot better. We had the usual problems with national recessions and stuff, but these days it's viewed as being a pretty successful place in an economic sense. A lot of that work was done in the 70s and 80s.
So then in 1988, you're the nominee for the Democratic Party.
I should have won that election.
Yeah.
They made mistakes that were unfortunate, but it's an interesting experience, is all I can tell you.
Yeah.
It's the biggest thing you'll ever have to undertake in politics, obviously. I ran a great primary campaign, not a very good final campaign, unfortunately. Spent too much time talking to people who I thought knew more than I did about how to win the presidency, all of whom poo-pooed the idea of precinct-based grassroots organizing, which I had always done well in my gubernatorial races, and it took a guy named Barack Obama to prove to all of us that precinct-based grassroots organizing works for presidential campaigns. fact that I didn't really do that was a big mistake. There it is. I mean, somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. In this particular case, just didn't do the kind of job that I should have done.
What was it like when you returned to Swarthmore as part of the campaign trail?
Had a great event at Swarthmore. A great one. It was wonderful to be back. At my alma mater and appealing to those young people. It's terrific. Anyway, I've got to leave you. I hope that's given you some sense of things, but stay in touch.
Sounds great. Mr. Dukakis, thank you so much for your time, and I hope you stay safe and healthy.
And I hope maybe next year we'll meet on the campus.
That would be wonderful.
That would be great. Thanks for calling. Really
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Stand with me in the belief that the best America is not behind us. The best America is yet to come.